A Beginner's Guide for How to Think Logically, Part 2, Using Base Rates, by Spence Antonio Marlen-Starr. This article is a follow-up to my previous article, which I published here on April 13th, with the same name, followed by Part 1. Makes sense. Friends, I'm going to tell you about a simple tool that will dramatically improve your abilities to think about things that I've been using ever since I first listened to the book Thinking Fast and Slow back when I was 18 and 19. Consult the relevant base rate before judging how likely or unlikely something is. To illustrate how to do this with a practical example, I'll single uh, I'll use a single example, but something in depth to use it as a case study. But I'll make sure to not use anything controversial so everyone can appreciate the lesson without getting their panties in a twist or whatever. It turns out that the lab leak hypothesis for the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic was just confirmed last week by a multitude of sources from the intelligence community and the investigative community within the United States government. I'm talking about the FBI and whatnot. When the first three people to contract COVID-19 illness were all employees at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, including the lead researcher physically involved in doing the physical manipulations of bat-borne coronaviruses via serial passage experiments to perform in the gain of function research they were doing. Now, I knew that it was probably a lab leak origin starting all the way back in May or June of 2020 with about 80% confidence. And the reason I was able to achieve this level of confidence was partially due to the simple use of base rates as a sanity check. When I first heard a scientist articulate the hypothesis on a podcast, I was stunned. And more importantly, I am not qualified or educated enough to understand microbiological evidence about how common furin cleavage sites are in the family of coronaviruses, which is the claim that this first ever scientist I heard talking about it said that was the major red flag that made him look into it, to be able to weigh that evidence properly. So what I did instead, in order to evaluate this hypothesis in a way that I could, was to Google search how many biosafety for level 4 labs like the Wuhan Institute of Virology there are in the United States and how many there are in China. Well, it turns out that there are 13 such labs in the United States and 2 in China. This is the base rate. It would not be surprising if there just happened to be a biosafety level 4 lab directly across the street from the wet market where people were claiming the virus originated from, if there were hundreds of them in China. But there were, and still only are, 2. Then I looked up what type of research was being done in said lab, and it turns out they were doing research on quote unquote SARS-like coronaviruses. Sounds familiar. And as part of this research, they had scientists exploring caves all over southern China on quest to bring back some more novel viruses to study as well. As well as getting viruses from bat caves in like 5 to 8 other countries sent to them all the time. Wait a second. You gotta ask yourself, how many other labs around the world are competing with them in this specific line of research on bat-borne SARS-like coronaviruses? That is the second, much more specific and much more important base rate to consult here. Pause for effect. And the drum roll, please, ladies and gentlemen. It turns out the answer was 0. They had a monopoly on the market. That is still not enough for my 80% confidence, however, because I have to compare these two base rates to how many bats there are near Wuhan, China, is the third and final base rate. Well, there are not very many. In fact, the best way to tell, I mean, there are bats everywhere, but the best way to tell is most of the bats and viruses from bats that are stored and the viruses that are stored in the Wuhan Institute of Virology from China came from southern China. And that, my dear friends, is a great, simple, most importantly, non controversial case study of how to use base rates to update your degrees of belief in a hypothesis. Thank you for attending this TED Talk. You're welcome.